Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and today I am joined by Jack because we have the Forbidden Light set review. May the 4th is going to bring us two things, not only Star Wars puns, but also the brand new set from Sun and Moon. As always, we're going to be going through the ratings and discussing all the interesting and important cards. So, here are the ratings.
Yeah, just as usual, we've kept the same rating system. This 5-star rating system you'll see in the top corner of every card we look at pretty much. What we rate it out of 5. Pause now if you want to have an in-depth look, but in general, you kind of understand the 5-star system. The more stars it gets, the better the card is. I think a lot of people have underestimated this set. There's actually some really, really good cards in this set that I think maybe even gone under the radar a little bit. So this is definitely going to be an interesting one to talk about. We're going to kick off with the trainers and then go into the Pokemon at the end. So because the trainers are often a little bit more interesting, or the cards that are likely to see a little bit more play, there's often a lot of filler Pokemon. But some of these trainers are actually really good. So Joe, if you want to kick us off with Beast Ball.
Yeah, indeed. We do start with Beast Ball. It allows you to look at your face-down prize cards and then choose an Ultra Beast you find there, reveal it and put it into your hand. If you do, shuffle Beast Ball into your remaining prize cards and put them back face down. So it reads very, very similarly to Gladion, but with the specific text around Ultra Beasts. We do have a handful of very playable Ultra Beasts, and a few more come out in this set as well. So it is something to note that Ultra Beasts are being played. Right now, the most playable one is probably Buzzwole. I would say that there's already so much search potential for things like Buzzwole that accessing it from prize cards isn't a huge deal, but you have to factor in the fact that this is similar power level to a town map in that you gain the information straight away, and you get to look at your prize cards. Not quite as powerful as town map, because you get to choose from then on what you're taking, but at least gaining access to those prizes and sometimes pulling out an important card from there could be powerful for you. Overall, we think it's not quite as powerful, even though, Gladion's a supporter card which has seen play with a similar effect. Gladion is much more flexible, and Beast Ball being so specific means in many games it'll just be a dead search. You'll just shuffle Beast Ball into your prizes, or like the Beast Ball just goes to your discard pile instead of your prizes. So just a little bit too specific for the card, but could randomly see play in Ultra Beast style decks instead of Town Map, for example.
Yeah. Next up, we have Beast Ring, which is actually a 5-star card. We're kicking it off pretty high. Beast Ring can only be played when you have when your opponent only has 3 or 4 prizes remaining. You search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards, reveal them, and attach them to one of your Ultra Beasts, and then you shuffle your deck. So this is 2 free attachments, which is insane. If you look at some of the Ultra Beast attacks, you can see that they're often quite a high cost, often not very many colorless energy in their attacks as well, so you can't abuse things like DCE or other sort of splashable energy mechanics. This is a splashable energy mechanic for Ultra Beasts, which is fantastic. I think it was pretty obvious from when we first saw Ultra Beasts that there would eventually be some kind of energy support for them, and this is it. This lets you get things like Knuckle Impact set up in a turn, Absorption set up in a turn, Sun's Eclipse set up in a turn, a huge attack from Necrozma set up in a turn, without actually even attaching for your turn. Just boosting you into these bigger sort of attacks that usually you wouldn't have access to very quickly. You can actually just get so much energy on the board. Plus, considering you can play multiple of these in a turn, you can actually attach sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 energy in one turn very, very easily if you're running multiple Beast Rings in your deck, which I think a lot of Ultra Beast base decks will do. Just being able to front load all of your energy on quickly and then never really have to worry about searching for energy later on in the game. Things like N, when you're down to 1 or 2 prizes, won't be an issue anymore because you'll already have your energy on the board. So 1, you'll be drawing less dead cards, plus 2, you'll have to find less cards to win the game, which is really, really strong. I think Beast Ring, like I say, will be a huge inclusion to pretty much all Ultra Beast decks. There's a couple, as we've mentioned with Beast Ball, that there's a couple of new Ultra Beasts at least that will come into the format and I think be a pretty high tier archetype. And I think Beast Ring is one of the sort of stepping stones that is going to push them into the higher tiers. It's just a really, really fantastic card. Attaching 2 energy from your deck as well is the best type of search. So yeah, it's just a really, really good way of ramping energy for your turn.
Yeah, cheating attachments is almost always the way that decks become powerful, and we've seen how good Buzzwole can be with just Max Elixir support, but now you gain on top of that Beast Ring, which is bonkers, and we've also seen Dustmane Necrozma be paired with things like Muse and just the Solgaleo Prism Star. Now again, you have Beast Ring, so that is a much more solidified archetype now in just being able to machine gun people with Meteor Tempest. So I think Beast Ring, just an incredible card. It's something that your opponent can't play around too well because they have to be on either 3 or 4 prizes at some point in the game. And just it gives comeback potential to all Ultra Beast decks, and that's really important in Pokemon because you can essentially get, 2 or 3 or 4, sometimes even 5 attachments on the board if you double Beast Ring and turn attach, and then play an N on the opponent after they go down to, 3 or 4 prizes, and that's absurd. You have your next 2 attackers ready to, take the last 4 prizes on your own side, and the opponent has to respond with a small hand size. So Beast Ring gives you great comeback potential, great board presence without having a board presence. That's what's really important. It really threatens the opponent of going too far ahead against Ultra Beast decks, even if you're drawing dead. If an Ultra Beast style deck, like a Buzzwole, Lycanroc, if they're doing not much and just like jet punching the active or whatever, the opponent still has to be cautious because if they take the knockout on this 1 energy Buzzwole, for example, they could be facing down a Knuckle Impact or an Absorption GX response and an N as well. So these are all things that you really do have to be concerned about when facing down Ultra Beast decks, and it's a huge, huge card for the new format. I think it's really, really powerful, supplementary to Max Elixir in already the sort of basic decks that we've seen, but could be seen, against all other Ultra Beasts as well. There's a Stage 1 version in this set as well, so do bear that in mind. Very, very powerful card. On to Ennaporter. This is a much less powerful card. It states, move a special energy card from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another of your opponent's Pokemon. I think in almost every situation, Enhanced Hammer is just a better card. There's very, very niche specific reasons why you'd want to move special energies around instead of just getting rid of it in the first place. And I think they're so niche that they're not worth discussing, and you'd rather, in general, just be playing Enhanced Hammer instead.
Yeah, it's pretty much always better to be discarding energy to force your opponent to get it back. So yeah, I think Ennaporter is a pretty weak card. Fossil Excavation Map searches your deck or discard pile for one unidentified fossil, reveals it and puts it into your hand. This is a little bit of a consistency boost for fossil-based decks, but fossil-based decks haven't seen play since the mechanic was overhauled last set. Rampardos saw a slight, minimal play, but the deck wasn't really very good at all. Tyrantrum is probably the best fossil we've got that comes in this set. It's probably the best of the 4 that we've seen, and is still not worth playing, even with the boosted consistency of Fossil Excavation Map. Just because unidentified fossil can't be bridgeted, that's essentially the biggest issue with this fossil mechanic. You can't bridge it for it, so you can't reliably get them onto the board. This does essentially double the amount of outs you have to getting them onto the board, but it's still not quite enough to play these Stage 2 decks.
Yeah, I mean, it probably goes in a small number of counts in the Fossil deck, but it's just us really saying that the Fossil mechanic still isn't really quite up to scratch. Next up, we have Mysterious Treasure. It might be printed as Mystery Treasure, we're not sure yet, but the bottom line is this card is very, very powerful. You discard 1 card from your hand. If you do, search your deck for a Psychic or Dragon Pokemon, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So it's half of an Ultra Ball, but it gets slightly more specific Pokemon, just the Psychics and Dragons. But there's some very good Psychic and Dragon Pokemon out and about. As you can see on the screen already, Tapu Lele GX, one of the biggest ones. So it acts very similarly to an Ultra Ball in the early game, and that's really important because it can get you into your Bridgets just like a normal Ultra Ball would. So now if you are playing a heavy Psychic or heavy Dragon variant, you now have, up to 8 outs on top of the physical Leles that you play with Ball Search to get you into early Wonder Tags, which gets you Bridget, which gets you Board's Presence. And that's pretty much how every deck kicks off in the standard format at the moment. So Mysterious Treasure alone for finding Lele is very, very powerful. But if you're already playing this sort of Psychic synergy deck, if you're a Garbodor variant, if you're a Trevenant variant in Expanded, or if you're this new archetype that's coming out of Forbidden Light, we're literally being spoon-fed this archetype, basically, because we get a new Beat Stick in Ultra Necrozma, and we get the Malamar, which is essentially a Bronzong, or it's an Electric, and they are both, Psychic and or Dragon Pokemon, so that's, really, really good for you. The whole deck can function off of this new card, so it's at least a 4-star because it jumps straight into a new archetype that's coming out, but it can see splashable play, as we've said, with Garbodor variants and the likes. So very, very good trainer card to search out some specific Pokemon in the format.
Yeah, this card is fantastic. Lele is still very prevalent. We thought maybe Glaceon would limit how much use Lele has, but it turns out Lele is still just a really good card. I think this would be a 5-star if you could search. If its search was a little wider, but that's why I've kept it as a 4-star, because it is still quite specific. The fact that it searches Lele is fantastic, but it's only really, really good in Dragon or Psychic decks that are also that the Lele is being run in. But in that deck specifically, this deck is going to have so much consistency, it's insane. So yeah, Mystery Treasure is very close to a 5-star, and is probably a 5-star in that deck, but it is a 4-star in everything else. Next up, we have Bonnie. This card is very, very specific to Zygarde GX, which we'll go over later on. So keep this in mind when we're talking about Zygarde. Bonnie can only be played if there's a stadium in play. You discard the stadium, and then Zygarde can reuse its GX attack this turn. It's super simple. When we talk about Zygarde, we'll talk a little bit more about the archetype itself. But Zygarde's GX attack essentially makes it immune to EXs and GXs, whilst dealing 150 damage as well for the next turn. So you can reuse that over and over, and you can kind of see the deck that we're trying to build. It's just a big wall of a Pokemon that's immune to a huge amount of the format right now. And you just ideally cycle Bonnie turn after turn, always doing 150. You may not be getting knockouts turn after turn because you might not be able to quite reach exactly where you want to be damage-wise, but it doesn't matter because you're forcing your opponent to find a Guzma or find an EX attack at turn after turn, which is a really, really important thing. The things you can put into the deck stadium-wise, Brooklet Hill is obviously a pretty good one because you're a fighting-based deck, so you're going to be able to search out more Zygarde, search out Diancie Prism Star is a new card that is fantastic and can be searched via Brooklet Hill, which is a really, really important thing because Prism Stars being a one-of makes them sometimes hard to search, so having multiple counts of Brooklet Hill in your deck already will help with that. Scorched Earth is a really, really good draw card that also combos with Zygarde's first attack, which lets you attach energy from the discard. So again, there's lots of internal synergies, and then Parallel City is and always will be, whilst it's in the format, an incredibly powerful stadium. So these are the kind of stadiums you can be using to recycle the GX attack with Bonnie. So in general, the card is just good because of Zygarde being a very, very powerful attacker. It potentially can just come into the format as a tier 2, a very high tier 2 archetype, we think. And just having the deck functions basically off of being able to recycle the GX attack through Bonnie. There's not much more to say just because the whole card is based on recycling this attack. But just immunity on a 200 HP basic is really, really strong. That can also be taking knockouts at the same time. It's another deck that we're kind of being spoon-fed from the set, and it's just got so many internal synergies. It's going to be very, very difficult for Bonnie not to see play with Zygarde because it's kind of what the deck's meant to do.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think Bonnie's pretty cool. Great option for Zygarde. What I liked that you mentioned, Jack, is how good the stadium pool is for fighting decks. Even something like a Buzz or Lycanroc variant, if you're playing like one Zygarde, you could even just throw in one Bonnie, because what's really cool about Bonnie is it just states if a GX attack has been used this turn. It doesn't have to be Zygarde's GX attack, or not this turn, this game. So you could use like a Lycanroc GX attack or an Absorption GX, blow something up, and then you can Bonnie reset it for exactly Zygarde. So that's really, really cool. I don't think it's quite splashable because it's kind of awkward to play like one Zygarde, even though it is searchable with a Brooklet Hill. But just playing one Bonnie, I think it's more likely that we'll try and mold around Zygarde on his own, as we'll talk about him later. But I think that's something to note, that you can use other GX attacks and then move into the Zygarde later. I think that's pretty cool. On to Diantha. This is a pretty cool card for Fairy support, actually. You can play this card only if one of your Fairy Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn. Put 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. So it's got a similar effect to like Teammates, but instead of getting stuff from the deck, you're getting stuff from your discard pile. So it's kind of merging together Double Puzzle and Teammates all into one package for exactly Fairy Pokemon. There's a few Fairy decks out there right now. Gardevoir sort of seeing play mainly really with Zoroark variants. But we've seen that, Puzzle in the Zoroark build is very, very popular. So perhaps playing one Diantha in that variant could be reasonable, especially because many times people will try and target your Ralts early on in the game. So recycling stuff like that is going to be nice. There's also the Sylveon sort of mill strategy, which is going around. They also utilize puzzles, so getting back more hammers or anything else from your discard pile that's going to be disruptive to the opponent could be reasonable in Diantha could be reasonable in the deck. You have to bear in mind, of course, Sylveon most of the game wants to not be knocked out in the first place, but it is something you could bear in mind. And perhaps the most synergistic is actually our old favourite Xerneas Break, because you play lots of single prize fairy Pokemon that you can just sort of allow the sort of Geomancy loop to get your board set up before you move into the livestream combos, or even when you are using livestream combos, you can Diantha, get back the specific pieces that you need to then get a return knockout the following turn, whether it's getting back choice bands, double colorless energies, the break itself, even getting things back like Max Elixir to get a new Xerneas Break out of nowhere, for example. So Diantha really does have cool synergy. I remember playing the Xerneas Break deck. It played a lot of Recycle. It played like 2 Super Rods and a Rescue Stretcher at times, as well as like EXP shares. So you want to constantly recycle your discard pile, so it's got great synergy with Xerneas decks as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really nice card for fairy types, and it will be interesting to see whether any of these archetypes come back or stay in the format with the support from Diantha. Next up, we have Lady. This searches your deck for 4 basic energy cards, reveals them, and put them into your hand. Super simple concept, very similar to Professor's Letter. Obviously, Professor's Letter is an item, whereas this is a supporter, but you're getting double the amount, so there's kind of a trade-off there. This is strictly an upgrade to Clement. As you can see, he's super upset about that, because Clement used to search for exactly lightnings instead of any cards, so any energy. So this is exactly a complete upgrade from Clement. But unfortunately, it doesn't mean it's an upgrade to the card overall. There's no real decks that can synergize from this, really. You're going to want to play this kind of card in a Magnezone Rain Dance style deck. But I think in general, the only Rain Dance style deck we actually have is Magnezone. And since that has Mount Coronet, a lot of the time you're going to be able to ditch energy and pick them up from the discard instead of from the deck. Obviously, it's going to be really nice to be able to grab them quickly from the deck. But I think the combination of a single, maybe 1-2 Professor's Letter, plus the fact you're going to be playing Mount Coronets anyway to synergize with Duskmane Necrozma's attack anyway, you're never really going to have the time to play Lady. People have played around with Fisherman, but again, in general, it's slightly better to be getting energy from the discard, because that's what Duskmane Necrozma is doing. It's ditching the energy. So this is strictly only particularly good in the early turns, theoretically. And in general, you're going to need to be cycling to get into your Magnezones in the early turns anyway. So there's just no real space for this card in the Magnezone Rain Dance deck, and I don't think there's really any other deck we can see it being put in right now.
Yep, have to agree. On to another Prism Star supporter card that we gained from this set. That is going to be Lysander Prism Star. Very, very interesting card. It states, for each fire Pokemon in play, put 1 card from your opponent's discard pile into their lost zone, and that essentially means they can no longer access it. So at the moment, really, there's more applications in Expanded than there is in Standard, in my opinion. Fire right now isn't doing too great in Standard, but there is still the Turbo Turtles archetype going around in Expanded, and one of the reasons why it sort of faded out of Expanded was actually because Night March was a fairly difficult matchup for it. But now with Lysander Prism Star, you can deny their Night Marchers, put them in the lost zone rather than the discard pile, and now Night March is no longer a threat. Additionally, you can deny Propagation Execute from Zoroark players, you can deny their DCEs as well, which is important, and you can deny VS Seeker targets as well. So lots of stuff that people use in the discard pile in Expanded, much more than in Standard right now. So I think really the only thing we're targeting is puzzles if you're using Lysander in Standard, but definitely a card that you can keep an eye on for future, because he is slow, he's not drawing you cards, he's kind of niche in that it's sort of a greedy turn that you can play him on, where you're probably already ahead in the game, but resource-wise, it could be a game-changing card at times, so keep an eye on this for fire decks in the future.
Yeah, definitely a better Expanded card, but also a very, very powerful resource in the fire archetypes sort of toolbox. Ultra Recon Squad is another of these Ultra Beast synergy cards. Lets you discard up to 2 Ultra Beasts from your hand, then draw 3 cards for each card you discarded this way. So if you discard 2, you're drawing 6. That's double a how. That's great, but in general, in this Ultra Beast deck that I think we're really going to see built from this set, where you would likely play this card because you're going to have a consistent amount of Ultra Beasts. You actually want to have your Ultra Beasts on the board because they're also your damage output. So unless you have a full board and you know you're not going to get knocked out next turn, so you're not going to need to replace these Ultra Beasts. I think in general it's going to be quite hard to find extra Ultra Beasts to be able to discard with Ultra Recon Squad, especially as you may need them back in the late game to help push for more knockouts or get more attackers in general. You can search for Ultra Beasts using Ultra Space. We'll be talking about that card a little bit later on, but essentially it lets you search your deck for an Ultra Beast. So you theoretically can combine this to have a Stadium card that searches your deck for a card and then draws 3 cards. But in general, that's a very, very convoluted combination, especially in this deck that we see where you're actually going to want the Ultra Beasts on the board as opposed to discarding them. So it's a very, very strong effect, and drawing 6 cards from one card is very, very good. But in general, it's quite anti-synergistic with the deck overall, so we don't think it's going to see too much play, and we think there's still better supporters to play in that deck.
Yeah, I think if Naganadel didn't need exactly Ultra Beast on the board, it could see maybe a little speck of play, just because Ultra Space, great in the early game, but then, you'll be searching the deck just to thin a single card, really, put it into your hand. And then potentially there'd be synergy there. You can see they're trying to make it work, but it's just the fact that exactly Naganadel needs to have board presence with Ultra Beast specifically, so that's why it doesn't quite work out. But I think the amount of draw that you can get whilst deck thinning, it's almost like doing 2 trades, but for a supporter. So yeah, a little bit awkward just because of how Naganadel does its damage, basically. On to another supporter, we have Wake. This guy interacts with water Pokemon. You discard 2 water energy cards from your hand. If you do, search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand. So you're getting to search literally anything from your deck at the cost of getting rid of 2 water energy. Water energy likes being put into the discard pile because we have Aqua Patch, of course. So if you're going to try and play an Aqua Box style deck, this can get you some specific cards. Maybe gets you more Aqua Patches, for example, just to burst out a Lapras out of nowhere. That could be a pretty cool combo. I can see it maybe being a 1 or 2 of in that sort of archetype, just to give yourself extra activators for Aqua Patch. But unfortunately, the Aqua Box deck isn't quite up to power level right now. I think there's another card in this set that can give it a little glimmer of hope, but I still think it's definitely below top tier at best, really. And the other synergy really is with Space Beacon. Starmie gets you water energies. Why don't you just use Starmie, then discard those water energies straight away and upgrade those 2 water energy to anything else in your deck? Could potentially help the consistency of Greninja. But the big issue with Wake is he doesn't help the early game consistency of Greninja, and that is exactly the thing that you need to try and make as good as possible when you are playing Greninja. We all know how fragile it is in the early turns, and when you build to the late game, you become a force to be reckoned with no matter what deck you're up against. And I think Wake really identifies himself as a win more card, because if you've already got Space Beacon established, if you've already got Greninjas on board, you can go ahead and use Wake for devastating effect and get more like Splash Energies, Choice Bands, stuff like that, more Break Evolution pieces from your deck. But because you've already done all that stuff in the early game, it doesn't really matter. You're probably going to be ahead anyway, or moving into a favourable spot, even if you're not ahead on prize trade at that point. So Wake doesn't help the early game jank that Greninja has, and that's why I don't think you ever dedicate a slot to him.
Yeah, exactly. Steel Frying Pan is one of the only tools we're getting in this set. I think it may actually be the only tool we're getting in this set, which can be attached to metal Pokemon to give them no weakness and make them reduce, or they take 30 less damage from attacks after applying resistance. So this is a really, really sort of similar card to the one we've seen already. Ultra of the Sun does pretty much the exact same thing via the weakness and has seen no play. And Fighting Fury Belt is similar. Adding HP is very similar to taking less damage. Has seen a bit more play, but it also does an extra 10 damage, so it's slightly different. In general, this card isn't very good simply because cards like this, cards that have an effect that's only really active on your opponent's turn, often aren't very strong because your opponent always has an opportunity to respond to it, to deal with it, to find a field blower, something like that. Things like Choice Band and stuff are always better because you always at least get one use out of the card. When you attach a Choice Band, pretty much, you're always going to get a bonus 30 damage. There's niche situations where you're not, but in general, the idea is you're using a tool that will help you on your turn, whereas this is a tool that will hinder your opponent's turn, but actually it doesn't really do anything because they can just find a field blower and you've essentially done nothing. So these kinds of cards never really see too much play. Fighting Fury Belt is one of the only exceptions because it kind of does both. It increases your HP, but you're also doing a little bit of extra damage as well, so you are getting a little bit of an added effect, as well as adding 40 HP to yourself. So it's kind of in the middle, but Steel Frying Pan can be completely responded on your opponent's turn. They have all of the initiative to deal with this card, whereas things like Choice Band and stuff, as I say, they don't have initiative to deal with. So yeah, that's why these cards never really see too much play. And again, despite Metal getting all of these tools, this is not one that really will benefit it too much at all.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case. And another thing we have to bear in mind is that fire decks generally are one-hit KO decks anyway, so even if they're not hitting for weakness, they can still sometimes reach one hits just with like choice band support and steam ups. So there'll be times where they could even hit through Steel Frying Pan if they don't have Field Blower. So it feels like a pretty useless card. On to Lysander Labs, a interesting stadium card from the set. It says, ignore the effects of any Pokemon tool cards in play, both yours and your opponent's. This is obviously disadvantageous because there are some very, very good tools that you probably want to be playing, but you'll have to find a home for this card where you don't need tools to maybe increase your own damage output. Maybe you're just a 2-hit KO deck no matter what, and one that you can not require Floatstone. Maybe you just play switch cards instead, or just like a high Guzma count or whatever to try and get around that, or just have natural low retreat cost Pokemon. So already it's sort of in a difficult position because it has to be a deck that doesn't need a stadium card already and doesn't need to use excessive amounts of tools. So in terms of squeezing it into a deck, there already aren't many that can fit those two categories. But additionally, it's again, like Steel Frying Pan, it's a passive effect. Look at Aether Paradise, that reduces damage by 30. Essentially, if you're playing Lysander Labs, you're trying to deny Choice Band, and that is reducing 30 damage, but that's across the board. So again, it's not even working every time because there are decks that can just two-shot you anyway. So it just feels even worse than Aether Paradise. We've had a similar ability from Bayonet, which turns off tools. That's sort of like a smidgen of play, but it's very different comparing an ability to a stadium card because, again, Field Blower just wipes that away, or just counter stadiums. Stadiums are like rife at the moment. There's tons being played. The Brooklet Hills aren't going to go anywhere. Parallel City is going to be everywhere. Field Blower's everywhere just because of, stuff like Garbodor and everything else. So many ways that they can be gusted off, and you've pretty much done nothing with your stadiums. And that, combined with the fact that you need to be a very specific deck to make it work, means this probably isn't a very good card.
Yeah. Next up is Ultra Space, as we've already mentioned. Once during each player's turn, that player may search their deck for an Ultra Beast, reveal it, and put it into their hand. So kind of similar to Brooklet Hill because you're searching your deck, you're tutoring a card from your deck. It's a very specific one, letting you get an Ultra Beast. Because we've got this Stage 1 Ultra Beast in Naganadel, it's actually really, really good that we can search the basic Poipole and Naganadel all through one card. That's really, really nice. Also lets you search your deck for a card to then discard, whereas Brooklet Hill you have to bench it. Ultra Space lets you search your deck for a card and then discard it with Sycamore or something if you know you're not going to need it for the rest of the game. So it's a really, really nice card to have. We've mentioned this sort of Ultra Beast box in the Ganadel earlier on in the video, and we think this actually could be a pretty strong deck coming out of this set. And it's just pretty much going to go in that deck as an extra form of consistency to be able to search out more Pokemon. Very similar to how Mysterious Treasure is more Ultra Balls, this kind of can be treated as more Ultra Balls as well, because each turn you're able to get another Pokemon and carry on developing your board. So this, in combination with Bridget, can really set up your board turn 1, and then turn 2, you can get often very easily 2 Stage 1s out through Ultra Balls and Ultra Space, which is really, really nice. So you're always kind of building an attacker, especially as Naganadel is a cheap attacker as well. You can often have multiple Naganadels built up on your board all at once, which is really, really nice. The card won't see much play anywhere else just because it's so focused on Ultra Beasts, but we think it's a 3-star simply because it will go into this Ultra Beast deck. This Ultra Beast deck does seem to be a deck that's getting more and more resources. We're not sure whether it will be super top tier or whether it will just be sort of around tier 2, tier 3. But in general, it does seem to be getting more and more consistent. And Naganadel is a fantastic card, a fantastic type as well. So I think in general, this stadium is a really useful card to boost the consistency of the deck and hopefully push it into the higher tier archetype. Hopefully push it as a higher tier archetype.
Yeah, definitely exciting. And look at the bottom 2 cards as well. The Kartana being a searchable enhanced hammer, absolutely absurd. For free as well. Not having to spend any cards with normal Ultra Balls. And Dawnwings Necrozma with that invasion gets you out of awkward spots when you need it. So being able to just use the Ultra Space, which is already good for the rest of the archetype, just increases the value of things like Kartana and Dawnwings even more. Yeah, very, very powerful card. Looks really good in the Beast Box deck. As Jack said, that's the only real archetype we can see it in. There's like maybe a smidgen of hope it going into the Malamar deck just because you play Dawn Wings and the Ultra Necrozma, which is 2 Ultra Beasts, but probably won't be in a high count, so mainly just the Beast Box deck. But it's a star player in that deck for sure. Speaking of a star player for Ultra Beasts, we have a new Prism Star energy card called Beast Energy. It provides a colorless energy, but while attached to an Ultra Beast, it provides every type of energy, so a rainbow, but only one at a time. And the attacks of Ultra Beast this is attached to do 30 more damage to the opponent's active Pokemon. So it wraps it in a rainbow energy without putting damage on yourself with a free choice band, but not even choice band because it's on everything, non-EXs as well, and GXs. So really, really crazy. Free damage buffing on things like Buzzwole in early turns is absolutely insane. Jet Punch going from 30 to 60, dealing with just small HP Pokemon trying to evolve, which is already broken. Even just going up to 90 with a choice band on the active. Again, 1 energy just doing so much, and there's even more damage increases for exactly Buzzwole already. So that can just get way out of hand if you see Beast Energy early. Great for Naganadel because, again, it's looking for 2-hit KOs, but this gets pushed up a lot of the time. Dustmane, it's already doing huge damage, but look at Claw Slash now becoming a decent 2-hit KO option, or just making sure that Meteor, Tempest can even deal with, like Stage 2 GX Pokemon and stuff like that. It's just something that will always go into these decks if you are playing an Ultra Beast. I think, although there are the downsides of Enhanced Hammer, I think it's just so powerful that it is always a one-of if you're playing Ultra Beasts in some capacity in your deck, because at the very worst of times, it's just a colorless energy, which you can afford. But at the best of times, it is a huge damage buff for these decks.
Yeah, this card is fantastic. It definitely earns its 5-star rating. The fact it's a choice band built in with a rainbow energy is bonkers. We've seen how impactful choice band was on the format. Even cards like Muscle Band back in the day were really, really impactful. That was only 20 damage, and this is an attachment and an extra 10 damage. So yeah, this is insane. I think Buzzwole and Naganadel are the 2 big winners from this. But just thinking about this, Buzzwole with this attached as 60, with a choice band attached as 90, and with a Diancie Prism Star on the bench just 110, this means you can one-shot Zoroarks for 1 energy on turn 1. Like, it's not even difficult. It's insane how strong this boost of damage is. So this is without a doubt, I think, possibly the best Prism Star card we've seen so far. It's incredible, and it's just going to further improve these Ultra Beast decks. Think about this with Beast Ring as well. It's just crazy how much support these Ultra Beasts have finally got, like 6 months after release. Onto Unit Energy, the final Unit Energy fighting Fairy Dark. This one is really flavorful. This is all of the types of the Kalos legendaries, which is really, really cool. And it's actually a really, really good combination. It may be the best combination of all of the 3 Unit Energy because there's a lot of synergy with it. Altar of the Moon and Fairy Garden are both free retreating options that you now have access to with this energy, with decks that wouldn't usually have access to free retreat or reduced retreat, which is really, really nice. Zoroark is the best attacker in the game right now, or at least one of, and has been paired with Gardevoir and Lucario very recently in the past. And you can now use these as you can essentially use Flighty Energy as energy for Trickster GX now as well, which is one of the biggest things. You have access to multiple GX attacks via Unit Energy, which is really, really strong. Obviously, as we mentioned with Beast Energy, there's always the issue with Enhanced Hammer, and this does mean you have to have 2 attachments. But in general, just having access to this is really, really cool. I think Enhanced Hammer is the biggest downside, and it is essentially why it's only a 2-star card, because a lot of the time you're going to want that little bit of security of knowing you can play some basic energy to, 1, get around weird things like Circuitry, but 2, also get around Enhanced Hammer and stuff and know you're not going to be losing to just people that can cycle Enhanced Hammer, or we've just seen Kartana may actually become a really relevant card now. So being able to have an option to not sort of get ruined by a single Kartana is nice. But Unit Energy does definitely open some doors for some really interesting decks, and we haven't really seen too much experimentation with the other Unit Energy. There was some sort of play, but nothing too major. I think this is the best of the 3, and we'll see the most experimentation, but won't quite do much. And a final honorable mention to Crabominable as well. You can play Zoroark Crabominable, which actually seems like a really fun archetype, if I'm honest. Crabominable being able to one-shot Zoroarks is also really, really cool. So yeah, it's definitely the best of the three. Best of the three unit energy, sorry. But I think it's still going to have the slight downsides of being a special energy over basics, which is going to mean it's not quite going to see too much play, but it will definitely see experimentation.
Yep, definitely one to experiment with. Right, that rounds out the trainers and all that good stuff. So on to our first Pokemon, and we start off with a Alolan Executor. He is a 160 HP Stage 1, and that's why we're talking about him. That is easily the best part about this card. Really, really above the curve for a non-GX Stage 1 to have that amount of hit points. And you can see it has a single energy attack cost as well, so that already puts it in competition with Golisopod. Golisopod has seen play alongside Zoroark and has been seen on his own because his own attack is so powerful. So Alolan Executor has a lot to compete with, and Tropical Shake does 20 plus 20 more damage for each type of basic energy in your discard pile. You can't add more than 100 in this way. So Tropical Shake caps out at 120, which is the same as First Impression, but it's way, way harder to get Tropical Shake rolling. Even with things like Zoroark trading away lots of individual different basic energies, you're playing lots of random basic energies just for the sake of making Alolan Executor work, and there's no guarantee that you'll draw into them in the first place. So it feels super awkward. The HP is lush, but everything else is like really, really just too awkward for this card. So I would just say stick with Golisopod.
Yeah, I think the 160 HP is very flashy, but unfortunately Golisopod's a little bit more consistent. Next up, we have Alolan Marowak. Alolan Marowak, we're looking at essentially for the Alolan Circle, but Limbo Limbo is a really, really cool attack as well, letting you search your deck for up to 2 basic energy and attach them to your Pokemon. This is actually really, really good acceleration. Unfortunately, it's on a Stage 1. We've seen plenty of different Stage 1 acceleration sort of things before that haven't really seen play, just because they're a little bit slow, but it's always nice to have another sort of option. Alolan Circle, for a DCE, does 20 times the number of Alolan Pokemon you have in play. So it's essentially Zoroark's attack, but only for Alolans. And again, we've seen very, very similar attacks to this in the past. In general, we've seen that Zoroark is a fantastic attacker, but this is a little bit more specific. You are a Stage 1, you are a non-EX Stage 1 as opposed to a GX Stage 1, so you're only giving up 1 prize, and it does only have a DCE cost, so that's all well and good, but unfortunately, you only proc off of Alolan Pokemon, and if you think about the fact you're going to have to often use a Lele to be able to fill your board, you're kind of capping yourself at 100, which is already slightly worse. It means you're going to sometimes struggle to two-shot things, especially the Stage 1s without a choice band. And the other thing is, Cubone actually isn't an Alolan Pokemon, and that's one of the biggest downsides, because it means that you can't have Cubones, or your Cubones on the bench that you want to evolve into Alolan Marowaks don't actually count for your damage output. So any attack you do whilst you're setting up will be doing very pitiful damage. When you have a full board setup, you're going to be doing this 120, similar to Zoroark. But if you can get 4 Alolan Marowaks out, you could have got 4 Zoroarks out, and you're just playing a very, very similar deck, except you don't have access to trade. So it's kind of not. There's no real benefit for playing the Stage 1, because if you've got the board setup that would match the non-EX, because if you've got the board setup that would match the damage output of the GX version of the deck, i.e. Zoroark decks, you probably could have won the game because you have access to trade as well. So there's a lot of cool options you can put in with this kind of archetype, is one of the only benefits. Alolan Sandslash can be a way of drawing cards, but again, you don't get past the fact that your Cubones aren't Stage 1s, aren't Alolan, sorry. Alolan Ninetales is a nice way of getting around EXs and GXs, but again, you're then running 2 Stage 1s, which is kind of awkward. Alolan Vulpix does help that because it does mean you can search for your Alolans and maybe get around playing Lele, but even so, you still have to evolve all your Cubones. And Alolan Muck is a nice ability locker, but again, in general, if you've got this kind of board setup, you probably could have won the game with a board setup like that using Zoroark. So in general, this is a really, really cool attack, but why would you, if you can get this board setup, why would you do this instead of using Zoroark?
Yep, certainly outclassed as a main attacker, and his first attack is definitely glamorous, but we've seen it on countless previous cards. I've even put a Parasect up on there from Supreme Victors just to show that, no one remembers that card. And there's a reason why no one remembers it. It's because it never saw play. And even though this is a free attack cost, so essentially you're gaining 1 extra energy than you would have if you're using the Parasect from way back when, but it's still really not worth following, especially because I know this is a fire Pokemon with a colorless attack cost, so you sort of naturally think about the amount of fire support that you have, but a lot of different archetypes have better acceleration than using this Stage 1 Pokemon, so I think he's definitely below the bar. On to Delphox, an interesting Stage 2 with the Magical Torch ability. Once during a turn, you may leave your opponent's active Pokemon burned, and it also has the Fire Spin attack for 2 fire, 2 colorless, 150, discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. Being able to burn someone effectively these days is a free 20 damage for free, thanks to the change in burn rules, and it could potentially be even more than a free 20 damage, but again, we've seen this ability on similar cards. As you can see, Decidueye GX, that can be an extra 20, and that can be an extra 20 anywhere on the board. That's way, way better than just being on the active Pokemon. And we also have Salazzle, which can do Hot Poison, which is just a Stage 1 that can burn and poison. So it's not just a plus 20, it's a plus 30 as well, minimum. Even though Hot Poison is just a one-use thing, because it's a Stage 1, it gets bonus points. So I think if you're trying to increase your damage output in some way, unfortunately, this has to compete with Decidueye, Salazzle, and even the new Greninja that we'll look at later on. So I think it's outclassed in many, many situations.
Yep, spot on. Next up, we have Pyro. I think a card a lot of people are glossing over, but it's actually a little bit of a fan favorite over here. A nerve, whenever your opponent plays an item, also put a card from their hand, prevent all effects of that card done to this Pokemon. Essentially, you've got Omega Barrier from Primal Groudon, Regirock, some of the older Pokemon from the XY era, which is really, really cool. That was an incredibly strong ancient trait to have, and the fact that we have this back is really, really nice. Obviously, the downside is this is an ability, not an ancient trait, so therefore it can be shut off, and that's one of the big downsides. But still, it's good to have, and it's good to force extra resources out of your opponent. And then for a fighting DCE, Dominate Fang does 80 damage, and if Lysander Labs is in play, this attack does 60 more damage. 3 for 140 is pretty good, and then 3 for 170 is really good, but oh wait, you're not doing 170 with Choice Band because you have Lysander Labs in play. So actually, you're doing 3 for 140, which is very, very mediocre when you can never scale it up to 170. So then you're not playing Lysander Labs, and you're doing 3 for 110 because you've got benefit to Choice Band, and it's a little bit more awkward. But there's definitely something to this, maybe. We have the break, which I think a lot of people have forgotten about. For fighting colorless, that does 180, which is pretty cool. It means you can actually start one-shotting things. The card has a way of doing that. And when you consider a 160 HP Pokemon that can't be affected by things like Guzma and E-Hammer or not E-Hammer, but like all of these different things that would normally be able to affect your Pokemon, that's actually pretty cool. You can Kiawe onto them and not worry about getting sort of Guzma then Leylaid to be knocked out. There's a lot of really, really cool things that a Nerve actually helps you with, but at the end of the day, it is an ability and it's not an ancient trait, and I think that's one of the biggest downsides of Pyro. I know Joe is kind of a fan favorite of the set for Joe, so I'll let him talk about it a little bit more, but I think a lot of people have glossed over this card where there may be an inkling of something sort of peeping through the cracks.
Yeah, I'm excited for this card just to play around with, because I love playing Groudon. I loved playing even a Quad Regirock style deck in Expanded, so seeing this ability come back is just really fun for me. Obviously, as you said, being an ability is so much worse because it can be turned off by Garbodor, so straight away having a bad Garbodor matchup isn't going to be great for you. But as we said, 160 HP, it's tanky, it's not easy for things like Drampers or Espeons to one-hit KO Pyro Break. The real issue would be playing too many items and just falling prey to like a Trash Launch. If they can ability lock, Trash Launch, and then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But if you can stay away from some Garbodor decks, the only other real bad matchup for you would be Greninja, because they can Shuriken the bench and deal with your Pyro Breaks, because of course Unnerve doesn't get around splash damage on the bench. Stuff like Spread can also be a headache for you. But what I think is really cool is that essentially you can ignore the Lysander Labs. That just doesn't get played in Pyro at all. So Dominate Fang, as you said, can just do fairly easy 80 or 110 damage, which is nice. And Kaiser Tackle is big. 180, 210 with a choice band is really, really good. Gets KOs on Zoroark, and that's a baseline that we really, really do care about in the format. You can play EXP shares as well, so when Pyro breaks go down, as long as the EXP shares are on other Pyros with their abilities live, you can get those energies back and hopefully cycle a chain of lots of Pyros all doing 210. And if you can cycle basically 3 Pyros before they take 6 prizes, it's going to be great for you. Having things like Hooper sit in the active and just wall by yourself turns, so you can do things like Kiawe onto Pyros, it's going to be great, or at least the initial Pyro. And then through the help of EXP shares and manual attachments, you should be able to hopefully build 3 Pyros, and as long as you're dealing with 2 prize Pokemon, it's going to be great. It sounds terrible against a lot of single prize decks, but you have some good acceleration. You have the Change Clothes Magina that can swap your choice bands with EXP shares when you need them to, so I think it's something I definitely want to play around with. It's been written off just because the Dominate Fang Lysander Labs combo just doesn't work, but the break does do magic numbers, and that's something we do have to bear in mind. On to Frogadier now. Oh, sorry, Froakie. And Froakie, there are 2 new ones that we get in the set. Both 2-star in our opinion. A couple things to bear in mind. Firstly, on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a 50 HP Froakie, which is 10 less than the currently used Bubble Froakie. But it does have the ability Frubbles. If this Pokemon has any water energy attached to it, it has no retreat cost. Not quite perfect because you're still essentially, it's almost the same as attach retreating as just attaching and moving to the bench. It could be a little bit better if you're ever trying to attack with the Greninja, for example, if we're going to be using the GX later on. So do bear that in mind, but in general, having high HP is better, and the flop attack does pretty much nothing. On the flip side, we have the 70 HP Froakie, and having 10 more hit points, especially the jump from 60 to 70, is absolutely humongous. Do not sleep on this because you survive so much more. You survive hits from Lele's whilst you can attach to yourself, so you can attach a Splash turn 1 now as a Greninja player, which is really, really cool. And you survive just a lot of other things. You survive certain like Buzzwole maths, you force extra cards from them. You survive, like a Beast Energy Buzzwole, for example, or like force them to find extra cards. So just having 10 more hit points in general is just so huge. Helps you out against Devolve as well, that little bit extra. So 10 HP is amazing. We're rating both 2 stars because I think overall we still want to have the value of Bubble, because Bubble can still win you games. Just flipping heads helps you survive much more sometimes than just however much 10 HP would, just denying an attack altogether. But I think maybe we have a split. I would personally like to go to a decent chunk of 70 HP Froakies and just having 1 Bubble option. And I think Frubbles maybe sees play if you're going for a Greninja GX deck, but probably you just want HP over anything else.
Yeah, the jump from 60 to 70 is really, really big. Also with things like Galissapod and Tapu Bulu, they can't one-shot you, or Tapu Bulu can't one-shot you with Horn Attack, and the Galissapod actually has to move in and do First Impression for 120 to one-shot a Froakie now. So these are little things that may actually push the 70 HP Froakie to be the one that's played in Greninja. I think in general, all 3 of these could kind of see play in any of them because they're all very, very similar and all have a very, very good thing about them. But it's good to know that after rotation, if we still want to play Greninja, the Greninja GX, we still have good Froakies to play with. Next up we have Frogadier, another fantastic card. It seems that this starter line always gets really good cards. The ability Gale Shuriken. When you play this Pokemon to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So this is Sneaky Bite from Golbat, which saw a huge amount of play when it was released. However, it is in general a slightly better card than the Frogadier. The Frogadier does have 10 more HP, which is nice, but doesn't have free retreat, which is one big thing. The fact that all of the bats pretty much had free retreat meant you had so much sort of movability. You could move so much, and the whole deck kind of never could be Lysander stalled just because everything had free retreat, other than the Landresses. And if the Landresses were in the active, that was you were doing damage. So kind of meant you could never really stall this deck, which was really, really big. Which is where the bats saw a lot of play. Similarly with Mega Manectric and Manectric, both had sort of low retreat costs. So in general, you didn't really care about being Lysander stalled. whereas the Frogadier and Greninja line actually have pretty heavy retreat costs. So even that one retreat is a really, really big thing. But dropping 2 counters is really, really nice in this kind of format, which is actually pushing for 2 shots. 2 counters can actually push into 1 shots really, really well. Being able to sort of push for 1 shots with Zoroark is huge. I think this is the Frogadier you definitely play in Greninja Zoroark, and it actually seems like that archetype might be gaining a little bit of gaining some legs with this Frogadier, because it means that your Riotous Beating actually does 170, which knocks out a Lele, which is really, really useful in the late game. Plus, in general, we have good or better Frogadiers now for your better Froakies and Frogadiers now for your Greninjas as well to get into them nicer. In general, it's like just dropping 2 counters is really, really good. Jet Punch does 3 counters or 30 damage to the bench, but we've seen how that can set up knockouts for later. And very similarly, Frogadier does that. We know this card is good because of how good Golbat was. However, in this kind of format, in general, the HPs have been sort of buffed up a little bit. Everything's seeing 30, 40, 50 more HP than it would have back when Golbat was released. So maybe this isn't quite as impactful as it would have been. Maybe back then it would have been more of a 4-star card. But I think in general, this whole line, which will come together when Joe talks about Greninja GX, sort of will still see play because we've seen very similar cards in the past that sort of push this style of archetype, and it will probably be very, very useful again. The fact that we have a very similar attacker to Landorus in Buzzwole, that means that Landybats can kind of be translated to Buzzwole frogs, which is cool, but I don't know whether that will have enough legs compared to how Landybats did back in the day. But I think it's definitely a useful card to have for Greninja going forward, especially when we wrap it all together with Greninja GX in a second.
Yeah, certainly less good than Golbat, a lot more awkward. I like what you said about the Zoro Ninja. It's, you never used to use water dupes in that build, so just throwing that in, if you were playing Frogadier in the first place, it's going to be an upgrade from the other one. But obviously, if you're playing like a straightforward Greninja deck as we know it, the Shadow Stitching Break Evolution one, you still don't play this Frogadier, you just need to max out on water dupes. So this will only be in the sort of quote-unquote new age of Greninja decks, if any at all, so do bear that in mind. On to Greninja GX. This has, as we mentioned, a very similar ability to Crobat. It is going to be Wind Shuriken. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during a turn, you may put 3 counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So it reads exactly the same as Surprise Bite, but there's a lot more to this card. It's 230 HP for a stage 2. Weak to grass is definitely a hindrance because we've already mentioned things like Golisopod in this video, and that's really not going anywhere. But it does have a couple decent attacks here. For a water and 2 colorless, Hazy Slash does 110, and you may shuffle this Pokemon and alt cards attached to it into your deck. I like this as a you may shuffle, so if there are situations where you tank hits, and as we've seen with things like Gardevoir, a lot of the time, just think about Broken Guardy, it was all about tanking hits and reloading on attacks. You could potentially do the same thing here with Hazy Slash. You can tank a hit, then you hit them with a Hazy Slash straight afterwards and shuffle yourself back in. It's a little bit awkward because you're shuffling in some jankier cards, but hopefully you can get those back out and reuse those abilities, which could be potentially pretty good. It's kind of slow, so you wouldn't do it too often, but it could be a nice way to force the opponent to use things like Guzmas against you, just how we've seen people use like Acerolas on 210 HP Pokemon. It's definitely a viable strategy. Hazy Slash as well, the math isn't too bad. You can go to 140 with a Choice Band, and with a Wind Shuriken you get to 170, which is pretty nice, and with prior damage from other Wind Shurikens or Gale Shurikens, you can definitely make the maths favourable for you. So it's a decent, sometimes 2-shot, sometimes 1-shot attack, depending on how many snipes you put on the board, which is cool. And it even has the Shadow Assassin GX attack for a water and 2 colorless once again, but this does 130 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So again, the snipe is nice. You can do some damage to things that you've hit previously with Hazy Slash, for example, or other attackers that you're using in the deck. If this guy's just on the back burner, and again, it's decent maths for things like Tapu Lele because you can do 2 Frogadier drops and then a Shadow Assassin to finish off a Lele without the need for Guzma. So definitely a pretty cool card. I don't think it goes in current Greninja as like a one-of. We have seen when the black and white Greninja was out, we sometimes played a one-of split alongside 3 Shadow Stitchers because it had a ability which could get some more damage counters on the board. But that was mainly because of Night March being an archetype come Worlds. So I don't think this is good enough to just go into a regular Greninja deck. I think it sort of steps aside and tries to become its own thing. One of the big downsides of this card, again, is that it has 2 retreat, so again, worse than Crobat in some respect. But there's different ways to play this. You could try and go for water duplicates, like normal, and just get 4 water duplicates out and just rely on a bunch of Wind Shurikens all dropping on one turn. And then you play things like Aqua Patches, DCEs, and rely on these Hazy Slashes and Shadow Assassin GX attacks and stuff, and just go heavy on the Greninja style. Or you just pretty much ignore the attacking text of this card and go for maybe like a sniping deck, as we mentioned, something like Landorus Bats of old, but now with a fresh coat of paint with things like Cocos and Buzzwoles. And bear in mind, we have Espeon EX still in the format, and although we've said lots of things gain a bunch of hit points, you know, the smaller stuff is still small, and it's really easy to Jet Punch set things up, and with all these Shurikens on top of stuff, you can go for crazy miraculous shine plays and get a bunch of knockouts. So I'm excited to play with this card. I accept that it's a lot more awkward. You're going to need extra spaces for float stones and extra switching cards, which really does hurt the deck, I'll be honest. But I think as an attacker, he's reasonable, and as a support Pokemon, he's also, again, reasonable. Something that we have to work on and see if there is ever going to be a sniping, spreading deck. We sort of tried it with the Decidueye previously, and it's not always worked out, and I think looking at that as a basis to go off of tells me that it's probably not going to be tier 1, but it's definitely something that we still need to explore.
Yeah, definitely. I think there'll always be potential for this card right in the format. Crobat saw 3 throughout its lifetime in Standard, so it's always useful to have this in the back of your mind for when you need a deck that, well, when you have a deck that maybe doesn't quite reach those knockouts or reach that damage that you want to. Next up, we have Volcanion Prism Star, a really, really cool Prism Star. Its ability, Jet Hose Down. Once during your turn, you may discard a water from your hand. If you do, your opponent switches their active with one of their bench. So this is really good for setting up things like Aqua Patch, which is really, really nice. This is the card that Joe mentioned earlier on, that could be another tool in Aquabox's basket that may push it into maybe tier 2 even. We'll see. But in general, this is a really, really nice sort of card that forces your opponent to do something. Whilst you don't get to pick, it would be insane if it was a Lysander on an ability. Even an Escape Rope once per turn can be annoying for your opponent if they don't have a Float Stone or anything like that, or maybe they don't have a Pokemon that they particularly want to take a hit. If they keep sending up the same Pokemon, eventually you're going to knock it out. So it's really, really nice. Very similar to Escape Rope, but on an ability, so it means you can run one card rather than run multiple copies of Escape Rope, whilst also setting a Aqua Patch, as we say. And then Sauna Bomb for 3 water does 100 damage and 20 to each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. We actually really, really like it for the 20 to each of the bench Pokemon more than the 100. The 100 is nice. But you're going to be knocking out pretty much anything with Blizzard Burn anyway. But now you're going to be knocking out anything with Blizzard Bird, because you're going to do 20 to all of your opponent's Zoroarks, for example, that have 210. And then a Choice Banded Blizzard Burn does 190, plus the 20 is 210. So actually Sauna Bomb sets up your opponent's board for Lapras to come through and sweep later on in the game, which is really, really nice. Volcanion Prism Star also forces your opponent to bring those Pokemon up via its ability Jet Hose Down. So it's a really, really nice synergistic card. You want to Sauna Bomb in the early turns. You want to attach some elixirs, some Aqua Patches. You can actually set yourself up via the ability plus Aqua Patch really quickly as well. So you can get a Sauna Bomb early in the game once your opponent's just Bridgeted. And then you want to finish the game off with Lapras being able to Blizzard Burn. So it's a really, really nice combo. We've kept it as a 2-star because essentially we're not quite sure how strong this archetype will be on the whole. Unfortunately, Lapras is still weak to grass, which is a hugely important thing, considering Gliscopod doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And in general, Volcanion Prism Star is a very, very clunky card. 3 energy attachments, plus 3 retreat cost, plus discarding every turn. It's not ideal, but we do think there may be enough to maybe drag this Aquabox deck back together and try it out. Maybe it can reach the bottom of tier 2, maybe even a little bit further. We'll have to wait and see. But in general, it does have very, very synergistic effects with the Lapras, which may be what the deck needed overall.
Yeah, I think he's really been undersold as an attacker. I think a lot of people look at the ability, say that it's kind of niche, say that it's only okay and that you can't put it into any deck, but then they ignore Sauna Bomb. And I think Sauna Bomb is actually a really, really powerful attack with the amount of acceleration that water has. With elixirs, with aqua patches, I've always been a fan of the Aquabox deck since we got Aqua Patch in the first place, and I saw how important things like the Articuno were for that deck. Single prize Pokemon that can deal damage and take knockouts is going to be really important. So Volcanion being 160 hit points on a basic is really, really awkward for a lot of Pokemon to deal with. And he can do that setup for the bench whilst also threatening a 2-hit KO in the active position, like a Tapu Koko but on absolute steroids. Very, very powerful card, and maybe enough to push Aquabox into the realms of relevancy once again. It's been a while since it has been, but I'm really excited about that card, and I want to see him work. It's just whether things like Aquabox and Elixir, Aqua Patch and Elixir can keep up with the insanity of Beast Ring and alike. So that's going to be the biggest challenge for the Aquabox deck, but I'm hopeful. I think Volcanion is a really, really high power level card, similar to things like the Prism Star Solgaleo and Lunala that we've seen, has forced creativity from people just because of how above the curve they are, and I think this fits into that category as well for Aquabox. Next up, we have Malamar. Malamar is one of the cards that many people are excited to see. We've already discussed it here and there when we talked about things like the Mystery Treasure card. This is very, very good. It's the return of Electric and or Bronzong, depending on the era that you are reminded of. And it has the Psychic Recharge ability. Once during a turn, you may attach a Psychic Energy card from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. So Psychic now has a plethora of great attackers and support Pokemon to power up with this Malamar. It also has the Psychic Sphere attack, but it's definitely a last case option, really. You don't want to be sacrificing your Malamars, putting them in the firing line. They're going to be chilling on the bench and setting up more powerful dudes. We keep talking about this Ultra Necrozma. We'll definitely get onto it later on. Unfortunately, it's a dragon type, so it comes late on our list. But definitely a crazy good beat stick that you will be powering up for this card. We have the Dawn Wings, which is basically reviving the electric archetype where we saw Rayquaza Eels. That's why we put the electric in here instead of the Bronzong, just because this is really, really similar to Ray Eels, basically, because you have the Beat Stick, you have the Rush-In Pokemon from Dawn Wings, which at the time was Keldeo, and you have the Malamar, which is literally electric. But the deck is on a much higher power level just because of the damage output that Ultra Necrozma has. So definitely going to be a powerful archetype, probably a top tier one even. The biggest downsides would be that it's ability focused and that it also needs a decent amount of bench size, so Paralycity still being in the format can be somewhat of a headache to it. But there's even other Psychic Pokemon that we can think about powering up. There's going to be the Prism Star Lunala, which gives us additional acceleration and can get around Ability Lock as well. So already we're sort of covering one of the weaknesses that I just mentioned. And as you can see on the bottom line, plenty of very cool Pokemon. Wobbuffet and Mimikyu as non-EX GX options. Psychic Assault finishing stuff off, maybe in combination with the current Necrozma GX that we have in format. Black Ray GX, everyone respects, is a very powerful attack. We've seen it impress in Expanded. Now that we have a very good accelerator in Standard, potentially the combination of a Black Ray around the board and then an army of Wobbuffets Psychic Assaulting everything and denying the opponent abilities. Imagine that if you're a Zoroark player. That's very, very scary. Wobbuffets just dealing with everything whilst you can't trade your way back into the game. Sounds very, very cool. Even something like a Necrozma into a Devolve play could be incredible as well. And don't forget how powerful Prismatic Burst is on its own. That also can get one-hit KOs with enough Malamars in play, so do bear that in mind. Mewtwo comes with a powerful GX attack, and Mimikyu can copy some great stuff. So I think there's lots of different ways we can try and take Malamar and make him good. Most likely it's going to be the revival of Ray Eels, where we're playing Necrozma Malamar, but there's also different ways to play it, like the Wobbuffet Necrozma deck, which I definitely want to try out because it sounds fun and it plays Wob, so I'll be playing it for sure.
This card is so exciting for me. I kind of started playing, or not started playing, but played quite a bit of Ray's format, and it was without a doubt my favourite deck, so I'm so excited to see it come back with like another rush in and another beat stick. It's really, really cool. But you can hear how excited we are about this card. This is one of the best types of energy acceleration. It's been so long since Psychic has had acceleration. There's been so many cards. If you go back and look at our past reviews, we've said, oh, this would be really good, but we don't have Psychic Acceleration, so we can't really feasibly power up this attacker. We've said that about so many cards over the past 24 months, and now finally we can actually do that, which is really cool. I think in general, this is going to struggle to not see a lot of play immediately, and the Rails style deck will be the deck that it sees playing. But I think this just opens so many doors for the future, and really means that we have to look at Psychic types very differently for the next 2 to 3 years while this is in format. Next up, we have Naganadel. This is another card we've talked about pretty much all the way through this, but haven't actually talked about it itself yet. It's a stage 1 Ultra Beast with 210 HP. It is weak to Psychic, which is kind of awkward, as Psychic is a very targeted type right now, or is a type that is being used to target a lot of things right now. But still, it gets around some of the more awkward things, like Mewtwo, as it can attack for a single energy, which is nice. Beast Raid for a single colorless does 20 times the amount of Ultra Beasts in play, and unlike Alola Marowak, this is actually very feasible to actually two-shot things with this, considering your basic is an Ultra Beast, meaning that you're powering up your attacker whilst also setting up your attackers for late game. We already have a good amount of good Ultra Beasts in the format. The fact this is a colorless attack means we can play Buzzwole and Fighting Energies to be able to set up stuff in the early game or take knockouts in the late game, which is really nice if we want to. We have Rush in as well, so we can never be Guzma stalled. And we have Kartana, and with Ultra Space, that's a searchable E-Hammer, as we mentioned, which is a really strong sort of concept, especially when Zoroark is, without a doubt, one of the top-tier archetypes right now. Being able to slice off their energy and then recycle and slice off again maybe later on is useful when we're in a two-shot war, especially when they have resistance on us. We need that little bit of an edge. However, with Beast Energy, we actually push it back into a two-shot without resistance, which is really nice. Jet Needle does 110 for a Psychic and a DCE, and isn't affected by weakness or resistance, so this is always going to be a two-shot pretty much. You're never going to be getting a one-shot, but you're also never not going to be getting a two-shot. You do need the Psychic Energy, which is a bit awkward, and in general, I think we're probably going to be mainly playing Fighting Energy for Buzzwole anyway. But the fact we're playing Beast Energy and the fact that it is a rainbow means we do actually have access to Jet Needle, which is nice. And this does do 170, which again is always a nice number to hit on Lele's in the late game, which is pretty cool. And finally, Stinger GX is the GX attack from Naganadel, which is a really interesting GX attack, and I think may potentially be played around with. Each player shuffles their prize cards into their decks and then replaces them with the top 3 cards from their deck. So essentially, you could be at best taking 2 prize cards taking 3 prize cards, whilst giving your opponent 2 more prize cards. That's the best case scenario. However, that's not always going to be ideal. And if you've got a board state where maybe you're 6 prizes to 1, your opponent may have a board state where they can win the game anyway. But in general, it's really nice to be able to maybe end someone to 1 and then sting a GX to put them to 3 prize cards so they can't win the next turn. Plus, you've end them to a single card in their hand, forcing them to not have many options. Unfortunately, your opponent does get the initiative with this attack, meaning that you don't get to do anything with the fact that you've reduced your prize cards and upped theirs, potentially in the best case scenario. They get the initiative to then reduce their prize cards back down. But that being said, paired with something like N, that can be pretty much negated. That's what you want to do with this kind of attack. You don't want to just sting a GX to take 3 prize cards. You want to give them the initiative, but give them as little initiative as possible to try and use it as a comeback mechanic. So it's a really interesting attack. I think in general, the deck seems to be better at just taking 6 prizes, but having this sort of ability to push your opponent down to 1 prize, end them, and then put 2 prizes back onto their board, meaning they can't win immediately next turn, really forces more resources from them. They're probably going to see it coming, but they can't stop an end to 1, really. There's nothing they can do, especially if you're able to take out their early sort of draw mechanic, things like Octillery and stuff, via Buzzwole and Beast Raid and stuff. You can get around them being able to draw out of this sort of lull you put them in with 1 prize, with 1 card in hand plus 3 prizes on their board. But in general, it's definitely, because you give them initiative, it's definitely not the most useful GX attack. It's just super interesting though. The card is all about Beast Raid pretty much, and Beast Box is built off of the back of Beast Raid, which is why it's a 3-star card. It'll be interesting to see where Beast Raid or Beast Box comes into the format, because there are definitely some issues with it. The whole deck, for example, is pretty much weak to Psychic, but a lot of Psychic types are also weak to Psychic, so you kind of have weakness on your weakness as well. So there's a lot of really, really cool things about this deck, and it'll be interesting to see how much of an impact this actually makes in the format.
Yeah, I think it will be impactful. Its typing is definitely one of the biggest factors driving it. Playing the combination of Buzzwole, a fighting type, and Naganadel, a psychic type, means you can be hitting opposing Buzzwoles, you can be hitting Lucario GXs, you can be hitting Zoroark GXs. So that is a big, big portion of the format, and as Jack mentioned, a lot of psychic tech Pokemon, think of mainly like Mew EX is the biggest one, is also weak to Psychic, so you can just respond on that quite easily, and it's not a huge amount of commitment because it's just a single colorless on your end to respond on it with a Naganadel. So definitely a potentially powerful card. As you said, the GX attack is a real head scratcher. You've got to find the good spots to make it work. Either try and rush it early game when the opponent doesn't have setup, and force your way into like a real strong arm position where you're going to win the game in a much, much smaller amount of turns. Or you can be behind in the game and suddenly have a way back in. And that's really, really exciting. It also puts them, hopefully, into that golden number of 3 prize cards remaining, where if they don't take more prizes the next turn, you can have a second shot at trying to get Beast Ring activation as well. So that could be a great way to burst out some more Buzzwoles and start swinging all over again. So definitely a potent card. We also need to give a shout out to Expanded, because you can Beast Raid for free and you can Sting a GX for a DCE, and that sounds pretty disgusting. So definitely a card which will be experimented with in both formats and is potentially very powerful. Speaking of a very powerful card, we have Diancie Prism Star. This is just obviously powerful. It's just, there's no other way to put this card. It just goes into any fighting deck, I think. That's pretty much the case that we'll see with this card. There's no reason to not play it. It's a single prize Pokemon. It has 120 hit points, so it's not particularly weak in any regard, and its ability is just so beneficial for fighting types. You've seen Regirock EX, he's a 2-prize, chunky Pokemon that sits on the bench and gives you plus 10, and can sometimes be an easy 2 prizes because it's weak to grass, but Diancie is a single prize Pokemon. Yes, it's still weak to grass, but it's just 1 prize, so you don't really care, and as long as this Pokemon's on your bench, your fighting Pokemon's attacks do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon before weakness and resistance. So twice as good as Regirock in terms of the buff, and it's half the downside because he's just a single prize Pokemon that's on the bench, and it even has a less retreat cost. So this card is just absolutely insane. Amazing math fixer for Lucario GX. Now Aura Strike with Diancie, Strong Energy, and Choice Band does 190, and that is absolutely absurd. Aura Strike doing that much damage is just silly. Even just sitting in the active position after evolving and just doing, the standard baseline of 30 now is just, again, it's absurd with the additions of Diancie, Strong Energy, Choice Band. You can be two-shotting stuff, just chilling in the active and just stacking up Lucario, which is very, very intimidating. Buzzwole as well, we've said so often. We've talked about Buzzwole a lot in this video, and he is super relevant already in the format, but he just gets better. Just an easy straight swap. Regirock goes back to the binder, Diancie comes straight in, and it's just a strict upgrade. Really, really good card. Its attack is for 3 fighting, does 90 and heal 30 from each of your bench, so not huge applications there, but if there is any random spread deck popping up, you can, I guess, accelerate to it. Maybe something like an Expanded against Trevenant, ? Who knows, but yeah, I mean, its ability is just stupidly powerful. Like, it's just obvious that this card goes into fighting decks. No questions asked, really. Especially because there's Brooklet Hill, which finds this super early, super easily. Just very, very powerful.
Yeah, I think this card, this in combination with Beast Ring, actually makes Buzzwole one of the best archetypes we've seen in an incredibly long time. It does so much pressure early game. Then, as soon as it loses its first 2 prizes, builds itself up, and it's bored to win in the late game. It's actually really quite scary how good Buzzwole seems to be getting with this. It gains this plus Beast Ring, plus Beast Energy. This is definitely the deck to beat, I think, coming out of this, even over some Zoroark variants. I think Buzzwole is probably as a baseline going to be the best deck in format coming out of this, at least for a while until lists are refined. Next up, we have Barbarical. This is not quite as impactful, but it's super cool. Barbarical is a 130 HP fighting type stage 1. And for a fighting and colorless, you can deal 30 damage with 7 shock. And if you have 7 cards in hand, your opponent's active Pokemon, sorry, is now paralyzed. 7 cards in hand is definitely doable with Zoroark. You can sort of manipulate your hand, discard the right cards, so you can always get to 7, which is really, really nice. And with things like Diancie, Regirock, Choice Band, and Strong, you can be two-shotting things, which is really, really cool because you lock your opponent so that they can't attack, and then knock them out the next turn. And because you're only a 1-prize attacker, you then your opponent then takes a knockout because you've got super low HP, but you've just knocked out a 2-prize Pokemon for your 1-prize Pokemon. So you always trade up, which is nice. However, the big downside, which has pretty much been the case since Burning Shadows, is Acerola and Guzma are still in the format, meaning that paralysis is really not good anymore. I think if we ever get a format where that's not the case, this could potentially be an interesting Pokemon, but since we have Guzma and Acerola, people always have access to being able to get around paralysis. Maybe the way to play this is playing something like this with ability lock, so your opponent can't Lele for these cards, and you kind of can try and lock this paralysis in. But in general, paralysis is nowhere near as powerful as it used to be because of Acerola and Guzma, and unfortunately that's what's holding this card back for now.
Yep, paralysis way weaker. 2 attachments as well. Even if it is a Zoroark deck, that's going to be painful. So I'd rather just be blowing stuff up if I'm playing a fighting type in my Zoroark deck. On to another fighting type Pokemon, we have Lycanroc. There's been plenty of interesting Lycanrocs already, so this has a lot to contend with, but, you're already playing Rockruff in a handful of decks, and certain lines of Lycanroc, this could be one that sneaks into builds as a non-GX attacker. It does for a fighting colorless 20 plus 20 more for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, so it's very similar to Mind Jack, just on a different scale. Not quite perfect, but it could be a means of getting around something like Hooper, for example. We already have the other Stage 1 Lycanroc, the non-GX, which is probably better at dealing with Hoopers exactly, but you don't really want to put in a deck just for a card just for Hooper. This card is a little bit more versatile and is slightly worse at dealing with Hooper, but just decent in general. It can knock out Zoroarks, it can two-shot other things here and there, so it's something to bear in mind. Accelerock is also a pretty average attack for 2 fighting and a colorless. Not much to talk about. I think overall you just this card doesn't see play, but it could be a one-of if you're already playing a thick Lycanroc line of some sort. And another note, almost probably more impactful, is that we also gain a 70 hit point Rockruff. Now, both the Rockruffs already have interesting attacks. There's the corner one, which can bail you out in weird spots if people are playing things like Octilleries. And there's the other Rockruff, the promo, that can just do 10 damage, and that's enough to get knockouts on things like Zorua if you have Astrology, or now a Diancie on board as well, so even more likely to tackle Zoruas for knockouts in the early turns. So again, something that we have to juggle. The extra 10 HP is great, but the other Rockruffs are also very good, so do bear that in mind.
Yeah. Next up we have Tyrantrum. And this is probably, as I said, the best fossil we've seen so far. And I actually think this actually has some merit compared to some of the other ones. 160 HP, technically a stage 2, which is awkward. And weak to grass is also awkward, but 160 HP is still a pretty big chunk, especially on a 9EX. The ability Tyranno Heart. If you have the same amount of fewer Pokemon in play than your opponent, this Pokemon's attacks do 60 more damage, and you reduce 30 damage taken from attacks. So you've technically got 190 HP if you have less Pokemon on your bench, or in play, or equal amounts, I guess. So it's definitely really, really interesting, a super interesting ability, and it means you can actually do some real damage with this guy, whilst being quite tanky as well. His attack for fighting colorless is Crunch for 100, and you discard an energy from your opponent's active. But with things like Tyranno Heart plus Diancie, Strong Energy, and Choice Band, you're going to be one-shotting them anyway. So the discard of an energy is kind of irrelevant, which is why we've got a Shining Celebi in here. Is this how we play the deck? It turns out the Tyrant actually has a really, really strong attack. It also has Crunch for a single fighting that does 20, and if heads, flip a coin, if heads discard an energy. and then for a fighting colorless, Hammer-In does 40. And it turns out these attacks are actually better than the Tyrantrum's Crunch, simply because you're not always one-shotting with this style, so you're always getting, so you're more likely to actually get sort of activation from the discard of the energy. Plus, but the main benefit is you're only one attachment, and that's really, really big, especially for a stage 2 deck, because you don't want to have to attach multiple times to a stage 2 because it's so difficult to get these guys out. We want to be able to power them up quickly. So in general, being able to crunch for 1 energy and still do a decent sort of 2-shot amount. You're doing 90 with a strong energy choice band and Diancie out. So you're still reliably 2-shotting things pretty much. Maybe you need an extra strong energy or a Kukui or something like that. But in general, you should be able to get a lot of 2-shots, which is really, really important. And Hammer-In can always push you into that 1-shot range on the turn after, where you wouldn't need to flip the coin if you're going to knock them out anyway. So maybe this is the way we play Tyrantrum. Again, you can't bridge it out fossils, which is awkward and will always kind of be the big downside of this deck. But I think for Joe's Pyro, this is my Pyro. Tyrantrum is definitely going to be something I'm playing around with. It's a really, really... I think it's got a lot of potential. It's really, really good for... Or it has a really, really sort of theoretical good combo with Shining Celebi. And you don't... like. It turns out that Tyrant's attacks are better, which is a really, really nice sort of synergy to have. Obviously, the big potential downside is the fact that if you want a Tyrantrum, plus a Shining Celebi, plus a Diancie on your board, plus probably another Tyrantrum on the bench, you've then got 4 Pokemon in play. Now, a lot of people are bridging right now, so in the early turns, that's fine. You're probably still potentially going to have less Pokemon in play than your opponent. But that being said, towards the late game, you may not be able to get this same sort of support from Tyrannoheart. But in the late game, maybe you can move to using Tyrantrum as a one-shot machine instead. So it's a really, really interesting concept. I'm definitely going to give it a go. I don't think it's anywhere near top-tier potential, but it's definitely going to be a lot of fun to try out. And this combo definitely seems like the best fossil Pokemon we've had since the mechanic was updated last set.
Ability reliant, stage 2, fossil. Let's move on.
Let's go. Let's go.
Next up, we have Zygarde GX. We've talked about this a lot with the Bonnie supporter. The synergy is just obvious there. But here are the attacks on this big, beefy, 200 hit point basic. And let's not ignore how big that is, actually. That's really, really powerful. Again, weak to grass. So Glyzopod, again, licks its lips at being able to just deal with this guy. But it does have a big chunky 3 retreat cost as well, so searchable via Brooklet Hill and Heavy Ball as well, so it's quite easy to find these guys. Its first attack, Cell Connector, for a double colorless, does 50, and you can attach 2 fighting energy cards from your discard pile to this Pokemon. Absolutely fantastic energy acceleration for this guy, because just for a DC, you're doing already 50, then you have Diancie and Choice Band on top of that. Very, very easy to get 2-hit KOs, whilst also accelerating into his other 2 bigger attacks, which is excellent for you. It actually reminds me in a little bit of something like a Mega Manetrix attack. Just for a single attachment, you can get 2 energy from your discard pile. So again, like, you're never going to lose to Mill just straight off the bat. And again, getting energy from the discard pile, always beneficial for you because it gives you free discards from like Ultra Balls and Sycamores that you don't care about. And you can thin the deck quite effectively. So very nice early attack. And with that 200 hit points, you can expect to be around unless you're being hit for weakness. And then there is the Land's Wrath attack for 2 fighting, 2 colorless, which does 130. Again, bumped up by Choice Band and Diancie. It's just a vanilla, but oftentimes that can be enough to deal with things like Tapu Lele. And again, there's Strong Energy on top of that, but I'm not even sure if you'll play Strong Energy because you'll already be playing DCE and you'll be reliant on basic fightings that you can get from the discard pile. So it's likely that this can actually not play Strong Energy in many respects. But the final attack, the one that combines with Bonnie to reuse it, bear that in mind as we talk about it, does 150 damage for, again, that 2 fighting, 2 colorless cost. And it states, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon GX and EX during your opponent's next turn. So we've mentioned how bulky he is. Now imagine that he can't be hit by GX and EXs. This guy's going to be sticking around. This guy's going to be getting 1-hit KOs with the help of Diancie and with the help of Choice Band. And if you can recycle that with Bonnie just once or twice a game, that might be enough to be winning the game, in all honesty. I think it's a very powerful attack. I think There's so much synergy with like Brooklet Hill, allowing you to get out Remoraid's and Octillery, which can supplement your draw, so you can draw into more Bonnies and more Stadiums, to recycle this once or twice, and you just gain such a big advantage by just being, 4 Zygardes in the deck, then just the rest of the deck is just support for him, basically, and go all in on the Judgment GX attack, try and tank with him, maybe other healing cards. We have the little Fair Energy Fairy Drop combo, the Unit Energy Fairy Drop combo. Again, you probably won't be playing it for the same reason why we might not be playing Strong Energy, or maybe not a high count of Strong Energy. But there could be other ways to heal your Zygarde up and make him tank that much more. I just think the fact that he can't be dealt with by GXs and EXs is just fantastic for you. Now, once you've used your GX attack, you're not even scared of Golisopod anymore. You're just going to be sat there, only scared of things like Mewtwo from evolutions and other stuff like that. But even then, they're going for like 2-hit KOs. You can burst through them with Judgment, and then because it's oftentimes just a one-of copy, your opponent's scrabbling around trying to recycle it with like Stretcher, find another DC and stuff like that. It's going to be awkward for them, is the bottom line. And I think if you can Bonnie once or twice, you can get a huge prize lead with Zygarde. And then because they're just so big, you can, even if one goes down, you can then cell connect it to the next one. Again, there's this 200 HP wall that the opponent has to deal with, because they could be hit at any time with Judgment GX all over again, thanks to Bonnie. So, a very intimidating card, and I'm excited to play around with him.
Yeah, there's so much obvious synergy, and I think there's going to be a lot of different cards you can play in this deck. It feels actually quite a lot like Groudon, where you're just building up huge monsters that just deal with things turn after turn once they're set up. So yeah, it's going to be a really, really interesting card. I'm definitely excited to play around with this and see whether this is another fighting type maybe in the format that can also sort of make a splash and really, really. I like the synergy is just too good. This card is going to struggle to be in the binder always. I think Judgment DX is just too good of an attack. Next up we have Yveltal, and oh, what a fall from grace this Pokemon has had. Yveltal EX was so good, and Yveltal GX is just so. It's so unfortunately mediocre. It's sad. 180 HP. It doesn't even gain sort of a really a HP buff. It's only a 10 HP buff from when the card was released about 4 years ago. Weak to Lightning is actually quite good right now. Only Coco is played, but Coco is played still. So you're still taking 100 from a Flying Flip with a Choice Band, which is always awkward. But resistance to fighting is actually really, really nice. Or would be if we weren't getting Diancie, Prism Star, and Beast Ring. So it turns out you probably don't live to fighting types anymore as well, which is also really awkward. So in general, it's like the stats aren't great for this card, and unfortunately the attacks are super weak as well. For a single Dark, Absorb Vitality does 20 damage, and you heal from this Pokemon the same amount of damage you did to your most active Pokemon. With a Choice Band, you're doing 1 for 50, heal 50, which is a bit better, but these heal attacks have never really seen much play. Especially one that only does 50 damage. You're not really progressing the board state very much at all. You're tanking, but you're not taking knockouts, so it's not really ideal. You're not going to see this taking knockouts anytime quickly. With Absorb Vitality, Evil Sonic for 3 colorless is 100, and the attack isn't affected by weakness or resistance, so again, this isn't getting 1-shots, and it's not always getting 2-shots even, unfortunately, because you can't reliably 2-shot 210 HP Pokemon. You need to have a Choice Band to do that. So whereas Naganadel doing 110 was always pretty much getting 2-shots, this isn't, which is even really, really awkward. 100 damage is just so bad. It forces you to have Choice Band. And then finally, for a single Dark Energy, Death Cap GX knocks out your opponent's active Pokemon if they have exactly 4 damage counters on them. That's why we've got the Coco and the Frogadier here. You can actually get 4 damage counters onto a Pokemon relatively easily. And then for a single dart, you can take the knockout. That's really cool. But unfortunately, the rest of the card is so bad, it doesn't matter that you've taken this huge tempo swing with a knockout, potentially even on turn 2, just out of nowhere, because the rest of the card doesn't do anything. So this card is so unfortunately mediocre, it's not going to see any play. Despite the really, really interesting GX attack, it's just so mediocre. I can't say anything more than just how mediocre this card is. And in a format with things like Zoroark and Beast Ring Buzzroll and things like that, Ultra Necrozma, you can't be mediocre and expect to be played.
Yeah, it's so much work just for 2 prizes. Even though the attack cost is cheap, you've probably had to do setup attacks or set up spreads somehow. And from there, like, good job, you got your awkward 2 prizes, but what do you do for the rest of the game? And that's pretty much the sad state of Yveltal GX. Onto the fairy types, we start off with Flabebe, a 30 hit point basic, which is absolutely terrible. We've said how important and relevant Boswell already is, so having 30 HP is already somewhat of a death sentence. It does carry on with this ability, though, that we saw on Shinx. It's even called the same thing, Evolutionary Advantage. If you go second, this Pokemon can evolve during your first turn. Now, there really aren't many good Florges cards. There's a new one, which we'll talk about next. The current Florges that we have in Breakthrough, it looks like, has Calming Aroma. Each of your Pokemon's attacks cost 1 fairy less. And obviously stackable, and you can maybe get Flabebes onto the board more quickly now. You can get your Florges built up hopefully quicker if you are going second. And even the Florges Break is an ability, but again, it's a stage 3, so not much to talk about here. Just saying and echoing the fact that they are trying to give back some advantage to decks if you are going second, because the game has been very, very focused on going first. There's no downside ever to going first, really, in Pokemon right now. But it's good to see that there's somewhat of a trickle that people are taking note of, that going second can sometimes be not as painful. Not that you'd ever choose to go second, but maybe eventually there'll be enough cards like this, and hopefully better ones, more relevant ones, where going second could be beneficial to you. So do bear that in mind.
Yeah. Speaking of, Florges has the ability Wonder Gift. Once during your turn, you may flip a coin. If heads, put an item card from your discard pile on top of your deck. We saw this ability with Porygon Z. I'm pretty sure I didn't see any play at all. And again, this probably won't see much play. We've rated it 1 star. But we do actually have Zoroark to immediately draw the Wonder Gifted card now, which is nice. You're probably going to be wanting to grab Puzzle of Time. Imagine if you have 2 Florges on your bench, you get double hedge, you put 2 Puzzle of Time. You then trade into your 2 Puzzle of Time, and you get exactly 2 cards from your discard. That's a really cool combo, but relies 2 heads flips and 2 stage 2s on the board. And again, if you've done that, why are you not playing something like Gardevoir or Gallade, where you're also taking knockouts at the same time? So in general, this is a really, really cool ability, but on a stage 2, it's just never really going to see play. It didn't see play back in Triumphant, and I don't think there's anywhere near enough support for it, even with Zoroark plus Puzzle right now, for it to see play nowadays.
Yep, spot on. On to Sylveon. This got a lot of hype when it first came out. People were very excited about it. We've rated it quite low as the 1 out of 5 there. Its attack, Wink, is the one that's got people talking. For a single colourless energy, your opponent reveals their hand. You may discard a supporter card you find there. If you do, use the effect of that supporter card as the effect of this attack. So, twofold benefit, really, because you are sometimes getting additional draw, or maybe like a free Bridget. Basically the effect of a free supporter card, which can be beneficial to you, whilst at the same time denying it from the opponent. So, hopefully, in a perfect world, they only have 1 supporter in their hand, and you can deny it from them, and then they start dead drawing. But that really is an ideal world, even with something like a red card into a Wink combination. Because we have Lele, because we have Ultra Ball, there's still plenty of outs that people can get back into the game, let alone just top decking into a new card. And although this is a colourless attack cost, because you are likely going to get this via an Energy Evolution Eevee, we still probably need to play Fair Energy in the first place, so that's not too big of a deal. And because it's second attack Magical Shot just does 40 for 2 energy, it's not like you can go for Wink and then just start pounding at them and really capitalising on this. The fact that the opponent's got dead draw, you've got to start building something else on the bench, and it's got to be with Fair Energies as well, so it's all sorts of awkward. The thing that it came down to was, if you want to win a Sylveon GX mirror match, this can be the one of tech that you can play, because you can be taking away their Lusamine loop, you can be taking away things like Handiworks that they're getting with their own magical ribbons. So if you want to win a Sylveon mirror, potentially shove this in. But that is about it.
Yeah, there's definitely not many uses for this card. And I think this was, in general, kind of overhyped when people first saw it. It's a lot more awkward than you think, because you're disrupting them for maybe a turn, but then you're not doing much yourself. So It's kind of awkward, but may see some very, very, very niche play. On to Xerneas GX. Xerneas GX is slightly better than Yveltal, which is really, really nice because it was often that Yveltal saw the limelight until Xerneas Break came out, and it turns out Xerneas is getting the limelight again, but only very slightly. 180 HP, again, not much of an upgrade from the previous one, but slightly better in general. Weakness to metal isn't that relevant because all metal Pokemon blow you up anyway, but could be slightly awkward in some situations. Resistance to dark is one of the biggest things. As we've mentioned, Zoroark is still pretty good Pokemon, so resistance to dark is super nice. We have sort of three very interesting attacks, or two very interesting attacks. We have Overrun, which is the exact same as Manectric EX, doing a 20/20 snipe for a colorless energy. Now you're probably going to be running Fairy Energy anyway, so in general this is essentially a Fairy Energy, but it is at least splashable. However, doing a splashable 20, maybe 40 damage, I suppose with the choice band, a splashable 100 damage is not great. You definitely have better splashable attackers. Aurora Horn for Fairy colorless does 120, a flat 120. This at least does a significant amount of damage, always two-shotting stuff, and one-shotting Ultra Necrozma GX, which is essentially why we've rated this as a 2-star, because Ultra Necrozma seems to be a tier 1 archetype, and this seems to be a very good counter to it. And the GX attack is probably the sort of the fanciest thing about the card. Sanctuary GX for the same cost, Fairy colorless. Move all damage counters from each of your Pokemon to your opponent's active Pokemon. So it's essentially 6 max potions without disguising energy and taking 2 prizes, which is really, really good in an ideal world. But how you've managed to get a 6 Pokemon with damage without being Guzma knocked out is pretty sort of surprising anyway. But you don't need to actually have that much damage on the board for this to be a good attack. If you can heal enough to take a knockout in general, you're sort of prize swinging essentially 4 prizes, because you're healing for 2 prizes worth of damage, plus you're taking 2 prizes. So whilst you're only taking 2, you're kind of doing a 4 prize board swing, which is really, really interesting. Very similar to Damage Change and Ice Path on previous cards we've seen. It is a huge cost in having 3 actual attachments, but we do have things like Geomancy and Max Elixir, as you can see on the side, to do that. Maybe we can see kind of a pseudo Fairy Box style deck come out of this as the counter to Ultra Necrozma. We have Xerneas, we have Geomancy Xerneas to help us build a board. We have Free Retreat on everything due to Fairy Garden. Choice Band actually means we're doing decent damage along with Max Elixirs to help with Xerneas. And Drampa is a fantastic counter to Zoroark, being able to Righteous Edge away their DCEs whilst they can't really one-shot you is huge. That's probably the way you win that matchup, by trying to run them out of energy, turning into more of a stall deck. But in general, this card is kind of up at the 2 stars because it could be good enough to counter exactly Ultra Necrozma, and that could be enough for it to push itself into seeing play. Considering with Drampa you have an answer to Zoroark, I think fighting is still a very, very hard matchup. But if you have an answer to what could be the best deck in format, you have to at least consider this archetype as one of interest. I think we're probably clutching at straws a little bit because there's definitely some inherent downsides, but in general, being able to beat Ultra Necrozma seems to be a very, very good starting point for a card coming out of this set.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a Xerneas, so I'm going to try it out. I was campaigning to put this more than a 1-star. I like that Overrun can set up maps with a choice band for Aurora Horn to do things like 170. Sanctuary GX, even more difficult to play around than things like Damage Change and Ice Path in the past. And as you said, Jack, Drampa, with the help of Fairy Garden, that Righteous Edge poking is much more effective because they can hit him, then you can just Fairy Garden out of there and go into something like a Sanctuary GX, or just keep the Drampa on the bench to take away more energy in future. I think the fact that you have the Geomancy acceleration on top of Max Elixir almost makes it feel like an old school Volcanion deck. But the big downside is you're only one-shotting the things that you hit for weakness, really, whereas Volcanion at times could one-shot pretty much anything. So It feels like the shell of a Volk deck, but without the explosive power that you have. The only real exchange is that you have Sanctuary GX, which is a pretty cool thing to go for, and I think that's the thing that we need to evaluate to see how powerful this is. But as we said, it's a fairy type, it's got good resistance, hits a good weakness now, finally, and those are the selling points of this card. It's just going to see how relevant the new Malamar deck becomes to see if this ever sees play, or if it just chills in the binder, unfortunately just below the bar. On to our dragon types. Before we talk about the big boy, we do have a little Goomy that we need to discuss. It's a 1 out of 5 with the cool ability Sticky Mucus. As long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, the attacks of your opponent's Pokemon cost colorless more. Now, this is actually like a huge upgrade to the Nervousy Trevenant that we saw back in Breakpoint, which never really saw any play, except for one UK Nationals. And yeah, this is like a huge upgrade because it's now on a basic and it's universal. So that's really cool. The only real downside is that we have pretty much no strafe in the current standard format, so there's no reason to really like wall with your Goomy. Potentially, as we mentioned, the Pyro archetype, this could be something that just goes into the active position while you build up Litleos into Pyros, and then you just start attaching everywhere, hopefully buying yourself more turns. What's pretty interesting is that, you know, Zoroark and Golisopod and Lucario, these are all decks that have earned their trade in the current standard format because they can attack for 1 energy attachment. And Goomy says no to that, and that's really annoying for people. So maybe this is just a walling Pokemon that goes into some sort of Werelord deck as like your non-GX Pokemon, and just mean that you can E-Hammer every turn and Goomy just stays alive, and you then Flare Grunt next turn and Goomy's not been hit yet because Sticky Mucus is just literally preventing the opponent from attacking if they're using one of these single energy attacking style decks. So could be a really great gimmick to try out, but right now I think there's not enough strafe cards to really show Goomy flexing his muscles, unfortunately.
Yeah. Another thing that gets around Goomy is, of course, things like Ultra Necrozma and Malamar, because any deck that can sort of accelerate energy is always going to be able to run this over. But in general, we just had to talk about it because it is a strict upgrade, and actually, like in this kind of format, could see if you hit the right matchups, this one-off tech could actually win you a few games. So that's really, really cool. However, on to Ultra Necrozma GX, and this is by far one of the best cards in the set, one of the best GXs we've seen in, I think, released. It's incredible how strong this card is. 190 HP on a basic. We've seen how strong it is with Buzzwole, and it is still really, really strong on a Dragon type. Fairy weakness, again, actually isn't that awkward, even though we've just talked about Xerneas. Xerneas is one of the only things that this is really bothered about. Things like Gardevoir is another thing it is bothered about. But the inherent strength of the card is it can blow up anything at all. So you kind of have weakness on everything, even though you're weak to Fairy type. So that's really, really cool. This card is kind of an amalgamation of sort of all 3 of these cards you can see on the left here: Rayquaza, Duskmane Necrozma, and Tapu Bulu. It kind of does these kind of style of effects. You're essentially building a strong attacker, blowing something up, and doing sort of rinsing, repeating that. Photon Geyser for a psychic and a metal energy does 20 damage, and you discard all psychic energy attached to you. You do 80 more damage for each psychic energy you discard. So that's immediately doing some really, really strong numbers. You can see on the side, with 1 discard you're doing 100, with 2 discards you're doing 180, with 3 discards you're doing 160. So with 3 discards you're one-shotting anything in the format. That's incredible, especially with 2 Malamar on the bench plus 1 turn attachment. That's really not that sort of a setup that's not that difficult to get set up every turn. However, for 2 energy plus a choice band, or 2 energy plus a beast energy, you're actually doing 210, which is the key number to hit right now, because you're one-shotting Zoroark, you're one-shotting Golisopod, you're one-shotting Lucarios, all of these really, really strong Pokemon that have 210 HP. 210 has kind of been the number you want to be hitting for the past few months, and this does it for 2 Psychic Energy discarded. So that's 1 Malamar attachment plus 1 attachment for the turn, or 2 Malamar attachments, and with Rush or Invasion Retreat on Dawnwing's Necrozma, if you have 2 Malamar on the bench, you have this every turn. You have 210 damage every turn, which is bonkers. It's just insane how sort of consistent this deck is. It's crazy. You have Metagross as another option, so you don't have to play Russian Free Retreat or Invasion Free Retreat. You can build your energy back up via that. That could be another potential option, however, it is at stage 2, so it's a bit more awkward. You also have Lunala as a late game, either attach more energy back to Ultra Necrozma to take a knockout, or even Malamar on and then Psystorm for a huge amount of damage itself. It can do both of those on a 160 HP Pokemon, provided you don't get it out too early, because it is weak to Zoroark. It can still deal a big knockout. So this deck definitely has sort of potential to go into the late game. Just the fact that Ultra Necrozma can one-shot literally anything in the format for getting through Psychic Energy on in a turn is crazy. But hitting that exact 210 on 2 Psychic Energy discarded just means this card is naturally just bonkers. Me and Joe have theory crafted this deck, and we actually sat and looked at the deck list for about an hour and thought, how do we beat this? It's crazy how good this deck is going to be, we think. Onto the GX attack as well. That's just the regular attack as well. The GX attack for the same cost, Psychic Metal, Sky Scorching Light GX. If there is exactly 6 or less prizes between your opponent in play, deal 6 or drop 6 counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon. Again, that's a huge amount of damage. That's potentially 360 damage for 2 energy, which is really, really strong. It's knocking out things like Zoruas, all of these little basic Pokemon that your opponent wants to evolve up. It's letting you set up for knockouts with maybe only one discard from a Photon Geyser with a Choice Band. You can then set up things like Buzzwole or other Ultra Necrozmas to deal 6 to them as well. So it's really, really good for cleaning up knockouts that maybe you couldn't get earlier on in the game. It's also good for setting up knockouts in that exact same way. If you deal 6 to all of your opponent's Pokemon, they can't heal all of those Pokemon at once, so you're guaranteed maybe 2 more knockouts off of the back of that, which is really, really strong. The caveat of only being able to use it whilst there's 6 prizes left in play is kind of awkward. Maybe you and your opponent need to both take some prizes first, but the fact is the same cost, plus dealing 6 to everything on your opponent's board is a huge board swing. And just in general, it both sets up and knocks out Pokemon, so it's kind of offensive and defensive, or not defensive, but a setup attack and a take prizes attack at the same time. So this deck is just insanely powerful, how flexible it is, how powerful of an attacker he is, how consistent the energy output is. It's just very difficult for us to see this not being a very top-tier archetype when it's released, just because, as we've said multiple times in the video, they really are spoon-feeding us this archetype.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more I can say about that archetype. It is really outstanding, and this guy is the reason why it works. Another thing to mention is that with the Lunala Prism Star and Beast Ring as well, there's the potential for it to even have like a sort of turbo Ultra Necrozma build where you're just using Elixirs, Lunala, and Beast Ring as well. So you may not even need a Malamar build for this guy. I think there's plenty of ways you can try and build around him. Even with Metagross, he could be like a one-of and still be just immensely powerful. So we've bumped him up all the way to 5 stars because he's the king of his own archetype, but may also see experimentation with all others, because look at the cards just to the right of him, the Rayquaza, the Duskmane, the Budu. These have all seen play, and this guy compares to him so favorably. All of these just get, brushed aside at how powerful this card is, just for the options that you gain from the GX attack and the raw damage output from him as well. So just an absolutely nutty card. Easy 5 stars from us. On to the last couple of cards here. We do have Noibat. It has the interesting attack, Destructive Sound. Your opponent reveals their hand and discards all item cards you find there. Similar to like a Getsis style effect, but in terms that you're trying to, in the early game, disrupt their early game from, denying them Ultra Balls, denying them even rare candy, stuff like that. And not only are you shuffling them back in, but you're discarding them as well. So they're resources that the opponent can't access again. And at the same time, you're increasing your Trash Launch count. I think that's the only real way that we can see this being played. Maybe in Expanded alongside Dimension Valley and something like a Mew. You could use Memories of Dawn to copy this attack and really go for like a full-on Garbodor toolbox deck. And this can be an early game attacking option for you, where you're denying the opponent useful resources and making Trash Launch powerful from the get-go. So it's not only a late game attack, now it's really good early game hitting as well once you've done one attack from Noibat potentially. So do bear that in mind. It's a little bit annoying. It could be the Noibat of choice if you're playing a Noivern GX deck as well, just because if you miss your combo for Distort, you can still go for this attack. But it's unlikely you'll be playing DCEs in Noivern anyway, so it doesn't feel quite perfect. Only 50 hit points, nothing outstanding, but something of note at the very least.
Yeah. Finally, onto the new cards. Of the new cards, sorry, we have Arceus Prism Star. It's a 2-star card. Rule of Origin, it's a 160 HP, again, huge amount of HP, but it is weak to fighting awkwardly. We've said how strong fighting's getting, so it is not quite as, it is a bit more fragile than the rest. The ability, as I was saying, Rule of Origin, prevent all effects of your opponent's attacks, excluding damage onto this Pokemon. So things like energy denial, all of those kinds of effects. Arceus Prism Star will go through them, which is really they won't affect Arceus Prism Star, which is really, really good. And then Trinity Star is a really, really sort of glamorous attack for a single colorless, does 30 damage. You can only use the attack if you have a grass, water, and lightning Pokemon on the bench. If you do, search for 3 basic energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like. So it's essentially search your deck for 3 energy if you meet this condition, and if you build your deck towards meet this condition, you can assume you're going to be getting those 3 energy, which is really, really nice. Where do you want these energy? We think this actually could be a really, really cute way of actually playing Tapu Bulu instead of Vikavolt, or maybe alongside Vikavolt, but as an early game option. You have Remoraid for the water type, you have Koko for the lightning type, and you have Bulu for the grass type. So you can actually set up a Bulu in a turn. And with max elixirs plus energy next turn, you can actually set up 2 Bulus across 2 turns to hopefully start using Nature's Judgment to start taking knockouts as of then. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite have the late game or as much of the late game potential as Vikavolt has, but maybe with elixirs you can attach enough energy to your Bulus to be able to take 6 prizes, which is nice. Plus Trinity Star does indeed set up Nature's Judgment, meaning that you don't need a choice band perhaps for your first Zoroark knockout or something like that. It's kind of awkward. You only have 1 Arceus Prism Star, so if it's prized, your whole deck relies on sort of building Tapu Bulus via max elixirs, which is never ideal. So in that case, you want to be playing Vikavolt. But it isn't a stage 2, which may be one of the biggest sort of benefits of playing this over Vikavolt. Maybe this is how you want to try Tapu Bulu if you don't like playing stage 2 decks. This is the real only archetype we can see it going in straight away. But provided we have things like Remoraid and Koko in the format, it's not actually too difficult to meet this condition for Trinity Star to activate. So it's definitely a really, really cool and glamorous attack, and potentially could be a cute way of powering up Bulus. But I think in general, it's probably not going to be the way we see Bulu played going into the future.
Yeah, that's our most creative build around that we could come up with, and it just shows this card's a little bit awkward. But again, 160 HP, way above the curve. Its ability is a nice bonus, and it is good at energy acceleration. That's at a colorless attack cost as well. So in theory, it's splashable. Potentially there'll be new combos in the future, but there are definitely downsides to this card. From there, we have a bunch of Pokemon that get alternate type reprints. Pretty much the same card, but now just gain new typing. We pretty much had to reevaluate them, even though we've seen these attacks before, we've seen them in the format already. Sometimes there are big buffs or big downsides to changing the type that it was originally. And in this case, we gain a Garchomp, moves over from a dragon type into a much better fighting type. You do change your weakness to grass, which is really awkward actually, because sometimes Zoroark is paired with Golisopod, and there's also Bulu as well. But gaining fighting typing is amazing for dealing with Zoroarks. Now you can be doing Quick Dive for 50, you can put the Choice Band on, and with Diancie help, and maybe even a Regirock or something like that, you could even be Quick Diving for KOs on the active Zoroarks, which is insane. You also have the Royal Blades attack, now not needing Cynthia to get one-hit KOs against Zoroark, and that's really huge, because the biggest downside of the Garchomp Lucario deck, despite the fact that you're a stage 2 with a stage 1 support that's ability reliant, is that you have to build it really, really awkwardly, where you need to Cynthia almost every turn, and you need to loop Cynthia. That was the biggest downside of Garchomp. You had to build it in such an erratic way that it never really worked out, but with enough Zoroark in the format, you can build a more traditional build of how a deck should look, with a reasonable supporter line, still obviously a high Cynthia count, but when you're up against these Zoroark decks, you're going to have a much, much better time than previously. So it's a big help for the Garchomp deck, but we still think that there are the issues of the fact of being a stage 2 that's stage 1 and ability reliant. There's still those inconsistencies and awkward things that you just can't help, but fighting typing is a big buff.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a really, really good type, but you're still at stage 2, which is awkward. And this being a different type doesn't really help that. So it's kind of awkward, but is at least somewhat of a buff. And finally, this is the rest of the different types. They're all pretty much 1-stars. They all haven't really seen much play at all. I guess Magnezone, Dialga, and Empoleon are the 3 honorable mentions that have seen the most play. Magnezone doesn't really benefit anything as a lightning type. Plus, we already have a Magnezone that has this ability right now in format anyway, that hasn't seen play since release. Dialga is actually worse as a Metal type because you now have weakness to fire, which isn't too much of an issue because fire isn't great, but in general it was nice at least not auto losing to fire types as the Metal player, because you had a different weakness in your arsenal. Now you are all weak to fire, which is awkward. And Empoleon loses out on being able to use Aqua Patch, which is awkward. So again, all of these are 1-stars, which is unfortunate, but it's useful to keep them in mind. Maybe we'll have uses for them in the future, perhaps. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, it's a little bit awkward that on this page, I think the most promising one is actually the Rotom. And that's because it's a Psychic type that can hit 120 for free. And we've said how good the Psychic Pokemon, or Psychic weakness is right now. It just happens to be still really awkward that you need to somehow get 9 or more tools in your discard pile. So maybe some funky Zoroark deck that plays a bunch of tools, and you just have Rotoms as your tech for Buzzwoles, Lucarios, and Naganadels could be the way to go, but I think that, again, is clutching at straws a little bit too much from me there, but we'll see. So here is the overall breakdown of our ratings. 4 5-star cards, they're all in front of you, and I think they're no-brainers, really. I think they are all justified in how good they are, and plenty of other interesting ones up there as well. Still a few flops here and there, but definitely things that are worth discussing, and even if they're not the most powerful cards, we have to set the record straight for why they're not the most powerful cards, and we have to justify those things as well. So in our recent set reviews, we've been fairly reasonable on the money. There's 1 or 2 standout cards that we get incorrect here and there, but normally we're fairly close. So hopefully this will give you a good breakdown of how the set's going to look.
That's the plan. So yeah, it's definitely a set that's, I think, a lot of people have kind of maybe not underrated, but have glossed over. There's not many sort of 3-4-star cards, but there are 4 very significant 5-star cards. And there's also lots of shiny things as well for all the collectors out there. There's full arts and rainbow rares and secret rares and all sorts of good stuff. So for all of you collectors out there as well, that's fantastic news. But yeah, we're going to have, this is sort of what always kicks off our first sort of look at a new set. Once, I would imagine, Joe is back from Stuttgart Regionals, which is taking place next weekend, we'll start maybe looking at some new deck analysis videos, as well as rounding off this format and looking at the Latin America International Championships coming up in 3 weeks' time as well. So, yeah, I don't think there's much else to say. Anything from you, Joe?
No, that'll be it, guys. If you stay to the end, thanks so much for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff if you did and you stayed to the end. Must have said something right at some point. And also get involved with arguments down below. What have we got right? What have we got wrong? What are you excited to test against? We want to hear it all. It's all about the discussion here. And we'll be excited to reply to all that good stuff and have a look as well. So that's going to be it from us. And stay tuned for another video. Cheers.